As you may know, I am pretty obsessed with generative music, or I guess I would rather say semi-generative music. And the reason I say that is because for many years, I fell deep down a rabbit hole trying to get an algorithm or a computer or a robot or a recurrent neural network to make good music. I even made a 3-part video series in 2018, and you could pretty much summarize the entire thing with no, computers cannot make good music. And I know that I sound cranky or pessimistic, but really asking a binary processing system to execute an operation that would emulate one of the most subjective and emotionally complex things that a human being can do is just a tad bit overzealous. I do go into this a lot more in this video, but one of the best examples I've ever seen in my life of what it musically means to be human is from Barry Harris's jazz workshops at the Royal Conservatory. In my favorite of these videos, he's just casually hanging out with these lucky students at this piano, explaining that in giant steps, which by the way is like the final boss of music improvisation, that in giant steps, if you're just playing the notes and scales that correspond perfectly to the chord charts, it sounds very complicated and robotic. However, if you just nod your head and play whatever you feel after you understand the song and after a lifetime of experience, it can sound truly beautiful. Meaning that what Barry Harris was demonstrating in this video is that music can transcend the quantification of notes or music theory. Much more relevant to this video, if music can transcend music theory, then it definitely can transcend language or code. I cannot explain my musicianship to you in English, and I definitely cannot explain it to a computer in C++. The reason I just blabbed about this so much is because today we are playing with a generative sequencer that seems to understand these limitations and work very well within them. Instead of just throwing a bunch of random notes into a scale, it actually creates cycles or loops that can hold deterministic values or changes. Then it could sparsely or sporadically or frequently randomize the changes within those cycles or patterns. So meet the Torso Electronics T-1, a generative sequencer that I've been excited about for well over a year because of its clever acknowledgement that generative works best when you allow a human to set the deterministic or familiar boundaries. The Torso T-1 was initially a crowdfunded passion project that has been a long time coming. It is powered by USB-C. It also transfers data that way. It has MIDI in, MIDI out, MIDI through. It has sync in and sync out, featuring both clock and reset ports. There's a CV mod in. There are 4 CV outs. There are 2 gate outs. However, using the desktop software, you could reconfigure those. So for example, you could have 3 gate outs or 3 CV outs or all gate outs if you wanted to, I don't know, trigger a drum sequence or something. Despite me probably overcomplicating things in this video, I was very impressed by how intuitive and easy to use the user interface was. I literally turned this thing on and I was going. So while this is a very powerful sequencer at face value, there are a lot of things that aren't quite as obvious. And Torso Electronics has an exhaustive manual as well as a whole bunch of informational videos. And we're probably not going to be covering every single feature that this does in this video, probably not even getting close to it. So if you're curious about that, the link's in the description. Without further ado, let's make some noise. So like I previously mentioned, one of the fundamental necessities of making generative music sound good to human ears is by making it in a deterministic way. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just create a deterministic, vanilla, polyrhythmic drum sequence and maybe a little melody over it. And then we're going to slowly make it more and more generative, and hopefully it'll sound good. The T-1 has a pretty wide selection of inputs and outputs on the back here, but due to its portability, I am just plugging a USB-C cable into a 2020 iPad Pro, and amazingly, it's just working flawlessly. So let's just start there. So I am on pattern 1 here, and I'm gonna go to MIDI channel 2 because that is where I have Maker FM, which is an FM drum machine on the iPad. Now, if I hold down the steps knob, we get to see that we have 16 steps. I can twist that knob and make less, or I can also just press buttons and limit it that way. I'm gonna leave it at 16, and then I'm gonna press pulses, and I'm just gonna make a typical 4/4 beat here. I'm gonna press play, and I'm gonna go to pitch, and I'm going to work my way down until I hear a kick drum. I'm gonna go to the second pattern, channel 2. I'm gonna do basically the exact same thing, except I'm just gonna put 1 pulse here, and then I'm gonna search for the snare. Do the same thing with pattern 3, except now we're just gonna make some hi-hats. going to turn the velocity down on the hi-hat. However, one thing that I could do is hold down the random button and then turn the velocity up just a bit, and now we have a bit of a randomized velocity. We also have a timing knob, which can throw the hi-hat way off. We could hold down the random knob and then humanize the timing just a little bit. We could add in repeats for the hi-hat, or some people would call this ratcheting. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna turn the repeats all the way down. I'm gonna hold down random, then I'm gonna turn the repeats up to just 1 here, so we have an occasional repeat. So let's go to pattern 4. I'm not going to switch channels because I want to be on channel 1 because I'm going to be triggering a digital synthesizer. So let's just put some pulses in to hear that. Now if I hold down pitch, I can actually create a chord. So not only can I move the pitch of the entire chord up or down, I could hold down control, which will harmonize it in a really interesting way. So back to our C major 7th chord here. If I move the scale over to a major scale and then move that pitch up again like this, it'll just always be in that major scale. So now we can push down random and turn the range up. And I'm gonna take the C away and bring it down and create a chord inversion, which might work better if we're gonna be randomizing all these things. And I'm gonna randomize the pitch a little bit too. I'm going to randomize some of the snare pulses a little bit. I'm going to divide the clock on the main synth, which will slow it down by half speed. Slow it down to a quarter speed. I'm going to create another percussion channel. Maybe this one with 6 steps. Start getting polyrhythmic. Now let's make the kick drum 15/16. So something you already may be noticing is my absolute favorite part about the T-1, and that what we're hearing is a repetitive pattern that is changing ever so slightly over time, almost like in the modular world what a Turing machine would do, but it's doing it to so many different instruments in harmony. Now to get a little bit more complicated in the way that the T-1 is creating this deterministic generative music is in cycles. Now if I hold down this knob, you will see it moving to different cycles, and each one of these cycles stores a different value that sounds familiar to us in the loop. At least that's the way that I understand it. And if we hold down control, we could actually increase the amount of cycles. And on the pad sound, I'm going to create a few more cycles here. I'm going to randomize them a whole bunch. I'm going to turn the division down on the piano, and then I'm going to randomize it quite a bit. I'm also going to change the range. Randomize the range. Make the hi-hats a little more busy. Randomizing the octave is actually a pretty good idea for bass. So what do you think? The T-1 comes in at about $600 USD after you convert it from euros. And in my opinion, with the amount of thoughtfulness and care that went into the firmware and user interface, I think that's a very good price. If you're already on the fence between this and another generative sequencer like the Square Pyramid or the Noodler, it's worth mentioning that pretty much all available generative sequencers have extremely different ways of getting the job done. However, that job that they're getting done is a very vast spectrum depending on what you like. I've used 4 or 5 entirely different generative sequencers in the exact same patch or song before, so it's not exactly something that I would consider objective competition. And by the way, Barry Harris, that wonderful, brilliant jazz musician that I mentioned earlier in this video, died about a month ago after contracting COVID-19. And that, as an understatement, is a huge bummer. We lost a legend. I kind of wanted to end the video with that, hoping that people would then go listen to him or watch videos of him or read about him, because he really is a huge inspiration to me. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel. If there's anything you want me to cover in the future, let me know in the comments. If you want access to a large, amazing Discord community with monthly songwriting challenges, audio assets, unreleased music, game servers, and so on, then my Patreon is for you. You can join for as little as $1. All right, I'm out. Bye.